I'm Joan Smith, a pediatric ICU nurse in Millbrook, Alabama, where sweet tea flows like water and everyone knows your business before you do. For 8 years, my life has been about saving children, counting pennies, and holding on to a dream of motherhood that's felt more like a prayer whispered in the dark. 8 years ago, I married Derek Smith, an insurance adjuster with a laugh that could fill a room and promises that sounded like forever. We were supposed to build something beautiful together, babies, a home where love lived in every corner, the kind of life you see in movies. But standing in our kitchen last Tuesday morning, staring at another negative pregnancy test while the coffee maker gurgled to life, my phone rang and changed everything. Derek's voice sounded strange, distant, like he was reading from a script he'd memorized but didn't quite believe. Our IVF savings were gone. All $180,000. 6 years of my double shifts at the hospital, Derek's weekend side jobs, every birthday and Christmas where we chose saving over celebrating. Transferred for what he called a business conference in Europe with Vanessa Cole from the resort marketing company. The way he said her name, with that careful casualness people use when they're hiding something, made my stomach twist. I set the negative pregnancy test on the counter, next to 5 others from the past month. Each one a small death, a dream deferred. My voice stayed steady as a heart monitor when I told him it sounded wonderful, that I was sure he'd learn a lot. The silence that followed was heavy with his confusion. He'd braced for tears, for shouting, for the kind of emotional response he'd grown used to dismissing. Instead, I gave him calm acceptance, and it threw him completely. If only he knew what Dr. Elena Rodriguez had told me 3 days earlier, sitting in her office with test results spread between us like tarot cards predicting a future I didn't want to see. My hormone levels were crashing, early onset menopause creeping in like a thief. 8 to 10 weeks, maybe less, before IVF became impossible. Time was running out faster than sand through an hourglass. 3 days ago, Dr. Rodriguez had been direct with me in that gentle but unflinching way good doctors master. My AMH levels had dropped significantly. We were looking at a very narrow window for IVF success, maybe 2 months at most. Every week we waited, the chances decreased. I'd sat there staring at the charts, feeling like I was watching my dreams dissolve in real time. I hadn't told Derek yet. Something in my gut told me to wait, and now I understood why. Some primitive instinct had been protecting me from exactly this moment. After hanging up, I opened our joint savings account online. The balance showed $847.23. Nearly everything was gone, transferred yesterday to an account I didn't recognize. But as the shock hit me, another feeling emerged, something that might have been relief. Because 8 months ago, after our 3rd failed IVF cycle, I'd started preparing for betrayal. Not infidelity necessarily, but Derek's pattern of putting everything else before our future together. His career, his hobbies, his need for approval from colleagues like Vanessa Cole. Every extra shift I'd worked since then, every bonus, every bit of overtime pay had gone into a separate account at Community Credit Union across town. An account Derek knew nothing about. I'd even sold my grandmother's jewelry, pieces he'd never paid attention to anyway. The balance showed $98,000. Enough for 2 full IVF cycles, maybe 3. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek about flight details and conference itineraries. Then another from Vanessa Cole herself, a message clearly meant for Derek but sent to me by mistake. The words made my blood run cold. Can't wait for our European adventure, baby. 2 weeks in paradise, just you and me. That evening, Derek came home whistling, completely oblivious to the storm brewing around him. He found me in the kitchen, meal prep containers lined up like soldiers, my movements precise and controlled. Over dinner, he showed me the itinerary Vanessa had sent. The 4 Seasons in Florence, a boutique hotel in Paris overlooking the Seine. Each detail sounded less like a business conference and more like a romantic honeymoon. When he handed me his phone to check something, I saw the text thread with Vanessa that confirmed every suspicion I'd been pushing down for months. Months of messages filled with pet names, sexual innuendos, plans for secret meetings. And there, like a dagger through my chest, Derek's own words. Using Joan's baby money for this trip feels wrong, but she'll understand eventually. She's always been understanding. Derek's face cycled through emotions when I confronted him. Denial, guilt, then anger. He tried to explain, to justify, to minimize. The conference was real, he insisted. What he had with Vanessa just happened. It was complicated. When I asked if he loved her, his silence was louder than any confession. That night, I lay in bed listening to Derek's guilty snores from the couch, planning my next moves with the methodical precision I used in the ICU when a child's life hung in the balance. This time, it was my own life I was fighting to save. The next morning, I drove to Samuel Hayes' office in downtown Millbrook, a brick building that had probably seen a century of secrets and scandals. Sam was exactly what my friend Brielle had described, methodical, sharp-eyed, with a wall full of degrees and a reputation for getting results. I spread out my documentation across his desk like evidence in a murder trial. Bank statements, pay stubs, printed screenshots of Derek's messages with Vanessa, even photos of my contributions to our savings over the years. Sam's eyes lit up as he reviewed everything. The transfer of marital assets to fund an extramarital affair was textbook financial misconduct. Combined with my medical situation and the time-sensitive nature of my treatment, we had grounds for emergency relief. Derek had documented his own crime in those text messages, particularly the one about using my baby money. Given the medical urgency, Sam could file for an emergency hearing. We'd freeze all remaining assets and demand immediate restitution of the transferred funds. People like Derek thought they could use marriage as a cover for theft. They were usually wrong. That afternoon, while Derek was at work finalizing his travel plans, I withdrew my share of what little remained in our joint account. I also closed our shared credit cards and transferred the utilities into my name only. When I got home, there was a package on the porch from a high-end boutique. Inside was an expensive men's watch with a note from Vanessa thanking her amazing husband for making dreams come true. I took a photo of the watch and note. More evidence for Sam. Derek came home that evening humming, but stopped short when he saw me at the kitchen table with my laptop open, showing him Vanessa's public Instagram posts. Photos of herself trying on lingerie with captions about romantic trips and paradise getaways. Each post was time-stamped and geo-tagged, creating a perfect timeline of their affair. His confidence evaporated as I walked him through the evidence methodically. The affair, the stolen money, Vanessa's very public documentation of their plans. When I slid the manila envelope across the table, his hand shook as he opened it. Divorce papers, a restraining order freezing our assets, and a demand for immediate return of the IVF funds. I handed him his packed bags and the medical records from Dr. Rodriguez, showing my hormone levels, my diagnosis, the timeline for treatment. 10 weeks, maybe less, to try IVF before my body made the choice for us. But he'd decided Vanessa's Instagram posts were more important than our last chance to have a baby. For the first time in our marriage, Derek was completely speechless. The legal case moved swiftly. Derek's reputation as a reliable insurance adjuster crumbled when his colleagues learned he'd stolen from his wife to fund an affair. Vanessa had initially stood by him until she realized the legal and financial implications of being involved with someone who'd committed what Judge Patricia Hawkins would later call egregious financial misconduct. Vanessa's Instagram feed became evidence in court. She documented every moment of their European trip, seemingly oblivious to the fact that her romantic posts were being used in divorce proceedings. Photos of her and Derek kissing in front of the Colosseum, sharing champagne on Paris balconies, shopping for designer clothes with my baby money. Each post time-stamped and geo-tagged, creating an irrefutable timeline of how they'd spent our savings. Meanwhile, I began IVF treatments using my secret savings account. Dr. Rodriguez worked with me to maximize our chances within my rapidly closing window. The first cycle was grueling, hormone injections that made me feel like I was living in someone else's body, daily monitoring appointments between my hospital shifts, the constant weight of hope and fear pressing against my chest. 3 weeks later, I sat in Dr. Rodriguez's office staring at an ultrasound screen, my heart pounding louder than a thunderstorm. A tiny flicker pulsed on the monitor. My baby. Against all odds, against time, against Derek's betrayal, the first round had worked. Dr. Rodriguez smiled as she printed the ultrasound photo. My numbers were perfect. All that careful planning had paid off. The day of the final divorce hearing was clear and bright, the kind of morning that feels like vindication. I wore a navy dress that carefully concealed the small bump just beginning to show. Derek sat across the courtroom looking like he'd aged 5 years in 2 months. Vanessa was conspicuously absent. Sam presented our case with surgical precision. Bank records, medical documentation, screenshots of social media posts. Judge Hawkins focused her stern attention on Derek, asking if he understood the severity of transferring funds designated for his wife's medical treatment to finance a vacation with his mistress. When Derek mumbled something about not understanding the medical urgency, I spoke quietly but clearly across the silent courtroom. Because you never asked. In 8 years of marriage, you never once asked about anything that didn't directly benefit you. Judge Hawkins' ruling was swift and comprehensive. I was awarded the house, 70% of our remaining assets, and Derek was ordered to repay the IVF funds immediately, plus interest and legal fees. Vanessa was named as a co-defendant and ordered to repay her share of what they'd spent in Europe. As we left the courthouse, Derek caught up with me in the parking lot, begging for another chance. He saw now what he'd lost, he claimed. Maybe we could try again. I turned to face him, my hand instinctively moving to rest on my belly. The gesture stopped him cold, understanding dawning in his eyes. I told him I was pregnant, that this baby would grow up knowing they were wanted, fought for, chosen first every single day. When he said it should be our baby, our family, I corrected him gently. This was my baby. And that was all it needed to be. 6 months later, I sat in my newly decorated nursery, putting finishing touches on a mobile made from pages of court documents, transformed into paper butterflies. Something beautiful from something painful. The room was painted soft yellow with white furniture and a rocking chair by the window. Photos lined the walls, not of Derek and our failed marriage, but of my real family. Brielle with her future godmother sign. Dr. Rodriguez at my baby shower. Sam Hayes' wife, who'd knitted a blanket after following the case in local news. Derek had moved in with Vanessa temporarily, but their relationship cracked under pressure from legal bills and social ostracism. His boss suggested he find work in another town after clients started requesting different adjusters. Vanessa eventually kicked him out when the novelty wore off and the bills kept coming. Last anyone heard, he was living in his car, the expensive watch she'd bought him long since pawned to pay attorney fees. My phone buzzed with one final message from Derek. I understand now what I lost. I hope you and the baby have everything you deserve. I looked around the room, at the life I'd built from the ashes of betrayal, and rested my hand on my 8-month belly. A strong kick from the little fighter inside reminded me of everything I'd fought for and won. The road here hadn't been easy. Years of heartbreak, of coming second to Derek's selfishness, of fighting for dreams while he spent them on someone else. But every step had led to this moment, to a home filled with hope, to a baby who would know from their first breath that they were enough, that they were chosen, that they were loved completely. Brielle arrived that evening with dinner and stories from the hospital. We sat on my porch watching the sunset, talking about baby names and the future. She told me I'd saved myself, and I thought about the woman I'd been when Derek made that phone call 8 months ago. Scared, desperate, willing to accept crumbs from a man who saw me as an afterthought. The woman in the mirror now was someone different. Strong, independent, days away from meeting the baby she'd fought heaven and earth to have. A mother who'd learned that sometimes the family you create is worth more than the one you're given. My phone lit up with a message from Dr. Rodriguez confirming our final appointment. Was I ready to meet my miracle? I smiled, my hand finding its familiar place on my belly, and whispered to the baby inside, to myself, to the life we'd built together. We're ready. We've been ready all along. The next morning brought contractions that started gentle as rain and built to thunder. I drove myself to the hospital where I'd spent years saving other people's children, where Brielle met me at the door with tears in her eyes and a wheelchair she insisted I didn't need but would use anyway. Dr. Rodriguez was there for the delivery, professional as always but with tears streaming down her cheeks when she placed my daughter in my arms. 7 pounds, 2 ounces of perfect, screaming life. Dark hair like mine, Derek's nose but my stubborn chin. She looked up at me with unfocused eyes that would later turn brown like coffee with cream, and I felt something shift in my chest, like a lock finally opening after years of trying different keys. "Hello, beautiful," I whispered, counting tiny fingers and toes, marveling at the miracle of her existence. "I'm your mama, and I have been waiting for you my whole life." Brielle took photos while I cradled my daughter, both of us crying happy tears in the delivery room where miracles happen daily, but this one was mine. Dr. Rodriguez explained the medical details, but I was only half listening, lost in the wonder of this tiny person who'd chosen me to be her mother. I named her Grace Elena Smith, Grace for the gift she represented, Elena for the doctor who'd made it possible. No hyphenated last name, no nod to Derek's family legacy. Just Grace Elena Smith, starting fresh with a clean slate and a mother who'd moved heaven and earth to bring her home. The first night in the hospital, I barely slept, not from exhaustion but from the overwhelming need to watch Grace breathe, to memorize every sound she made, to convince myself this wasn't a dream I'd wake up from. Nurses who'd worked with me for years stopped by with congratulations and gifts, creating an impromptu celebration in my room. Sam Hayes sent flowers with a card congratulating me on my victory, both legal and personal. Dr. Rodriguez brought a stuffed elephant that played lullabies. Even Judge Hawkins, who'd handled my divorce case, sent a card wishing Grace and me well. The community that had watched me fight for my dreams was celebrating my success. Derek never came to the hospital. I heard through Millbrook's gossip network that he'd tried to visit but was told by hospital security that he wasn't on the approved visitor list. Vanessa had left town entirely, her marketing career in ruins after the scandal became public knowledge. Their European romance hadn't survived the harsh light of legal consequences and social judgment. I didn't feel sorry for either of them. Some lessons can only be learned through losing everything, and maybe someday Derek would understand that stealing someone's dreams comes with a price higher than any court settlement. 3 days later, I carried Grace home to our yellow nursery with its butterfly mobile and rocking chair by the window. The house felt different now, no longer the place where my marriage had died but the sanctuary where my daughter would grow up surrounded by love and possibility. That first week was a blur of feedings and diaper changes, learning Grace's different cries and what they meant, marveling at how someone so small could completely reorganize my entire world. Brielle took vacation time to help, bringing groceries and wisdom from raising her own 3 children years earlier. Late one evening, as I sat in the rocking chair feeding Grace while moonlight streamed through the window, I thought about the phone call that had started this journey 8 months earlier. Derek's voice telling me our IVF money was gone, thinking I'd be understanding as always, expecting me to put his needs before my own dreams. He'd been so wrong about who I was, about what I was capable of when pushed too far. The meek, accommodating wife he'd married had evolved into a woman who knew her worth and wouldn't settle for less than she deserved. Grace would grow up seeing that strength, learning that dreams were worth fighting for and that sometimes the greatest victory was walking away from people who didn't value you. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. A message from Derek, sent from what was probably a borrowed phone since his service had been cut off for non-payment. He'd heard about Grace's birth through mutual friends and wanted me to know he was sorry for everything, that he hoped someday I'd let him be part of her life. I deleted the message without responding. Derek had forfeited his right to be part of our story when he chose Vanessa and luxury vacations over his wife and child. Grace deserved better than a father who only wanted her after losing everything else. Instead, I opened a new document on my phone and started writing Grace's birth story, not for social media or attention, but for her to read someday when she was old enough to understand. I wanted her to know how wanted she was, how many people had fought for her existence, how her very presence in the world was proof that dreams don't have expiration dates if you're willing to fight for them. Dear Grace, I typed with one hand while she slept against my chest. This is the story of how you came to be, and how you saved your mama in ways you'll probably never understand. As the weeks passed, Grace and I settled into our rhythm. Morning feedings as the sun rose over Millbrook, afternoon walks around the neighborhood where former patients' families would stop to congratulate me and coo over the baby, evening baths, and stories in the nursery where her butterfly mobile caught the last light of day. The legal settlement money allowed me to take extended maternity leave without financial stress. Derek's former assets were being liquidated to pay what he owed, and Sam had assured me that every penny would be recovered eventually, though Derek himself had declared bankruptcy and moved in with relatives in another state. Vanessa's attempts to rebuild her career had failed spectacularly. Her social media presence, once carefully curated to showcase her glamorous lifestyle, now served as evidence in multiple legal proceedings. The luxury resort company had terminated her employment when clients started cancelling bookings rather than work with someone associated with financial fraud. Their European adventure had cost them both everything, while I had gained the one thing I'd always wanted most. On Grace's 3-month birthday, I threw a small party in our backyard. Brielle brought her famous peach cobbler, Dr. Rodriguez came with her husband and teenage sons, and Sam Hayes surprised us with a college savings account he'd set up for Grace with a portion of the settlement money. "Every child deserves to start life with advantages," he explained as Grace grabbed his finger with her tiny fist. "This little one's mama fought harder than any client I've ever had. She deserves to know her future is secure." I looked around at these people who'd become Grace's chosen family, who'd supported me through the darkest months of my life and were now celebrating this bright new chapter. We were proof that families aren't always formed through blood or marriage, but through loyalty, love, and showing up when it matters most. As the sun set over our celebration, I held Grace on my lap and watched her reach for the colorful balloons tied to her high chair. She was growing so fast, already outgrowing newborn clothes and developing a personality that reminded me daily of her stubborn mama. Her laugh was pure joy, her curiosity endless, her trust in me absolute. Later that evening, after the guests had gone home and Grace was asleep in her crib, I sat in the rocking chair writing in the journal I'd started for her. Someday she'd want to know about her father, about why he wasn't part of our story, and I wanted to give her honest answers without poisoning her against him entirely. "Your father wasn't a bad man," I wrote, "but he made bad choices that hurt people who loved him." Sometimes adults get so focused on what they want that they forget about the people depending on them. That's not love, sweetheart. That's selfishness. Real love means putting the people you care about first, especially when it's hard. My phone rang, interrupting my writing. The caller ID showed Derek's sister calling from out of state. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. She was crying, apologizing for Derek's behavior, asking if she could send something for the baby. Derek was living with their parents now, working at a gas station to pay basic bills while bankruptcy proceedings dragged on. He talked about Grace constantly, she said, about how he'd lost everything that mattered by chasing something that was never real. I listened politely but didn't make any promises about future contact. Derek's regrets didn't erase the months he'd spent planning to steal our baby money for his girlfriend, didn't undo the lies or the betrayal or the deliberate cruelty of his choices. Grace and I were building something beautiful without him, and I wouldn't let his guilt complicate that. After hanging up, I checked on Grace one more time before bed. She slept peacefully in her crib, one small fist curled under her chin, completely trusting that she was safe and loved. Tomorrow would bring new milestones, new joys, new challenges to navigate as a single mother in a small town where everyone knew our story. But tonight, in the quiet of our home, I felt nothing but gratitude. Gratitude for the strength that had carried me through Derek's betrayal, for the friends who'd supported me, for the legal system that had protected my rights, and most of all, for the miracle sleeping in the next room. Grace Elena Smith, my daughter, my victory, my proof that sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted is the only way to find what you actually need. To everyone who has followed this journey, thank you for walking with me through betrayal, battles, and breakthroughs. If this story touched your heart, remember that your dreams are worth fighting for, even when the people closest to you try to steal them. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't saving a marriage, it's saving yourself and building something better from the pieces. Keep chasing your own dreams, trust your instincts when something feels wrong, and never underestimate the power of a woman who's finally had enough. The other side of betrayal might just be the most beautiful chapter of your life. Grace and I are living proof that miracles still happen, that justice sometimes wins, and that the family you choose can be stronger than the one you're given. We'll see you on the other side of whatever challenge you're facing. You're stronger than you know.